Yo guys, what is up? It's Jacob here again. So after watching Breath of the Wild trailer over and over and over again, too many times to count, so after watching it so many times, probably still missed a lot of information, but I've come to a couple theories, kinda, that I have about the Breath of the Wild as a game, where it takes place in the timelines, what the heck is going on. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of my theories and a little bit of my analysis on the Breath of the Wild trailer. Okay, so the big discussion with the Breath of the Wild is obviously where it's taking place in the timeline. A few years ago, Zelda released Hyrule Historia, and in that they released an official timeline of which the Legend of Zelda games take place. Okay, so there are 3 timelines. So after Ocarina of Time, there are 3 lines that split off. One is where the hero's defeated, that's where the original games come in, and the Oracle games, A Link to the Past, I think. Then there are 2 timelines where the hero is successful, one where he's turned back into a kid, then there's not a hero, and then one where he stays as an adult, Sacred Realm is sealed, and Ganon is defeated, and then he becomes like a soldier. There's one where he's turned back into a kid, that's where Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Four Swords, I think, takes place. Then there's one where he stays an adult, and then Ganon is sealed away, and then there's an era without a hero. The whole world is flooded. That's where Wind Waker, Spirit Tracks, and Phantom Hourglass take place. There's a whole big fuss about where this new Breath of the Wild game is going to take place, and to be honest, none of us really know whatsoever. The only people who know are the people who are making the game. So all of this is just theories, so we shouldn't get that mad at each other for our own opinions, our own thoughts. You know, it's really not that big of a deal. It's all constructive, it's all in good fun. I think there's a few ways that Nintendo's going to take this game, but before I get to the timeline, I want to talk about some other aspects that I've noticed in the trailer. So obviously one of the biggest things to note in the trailer is the presence of the Deku Tree. Now, we don't know if he's the first Deku Tree, if he's the last Deku Tree. We don't know if he's the Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time that was sprouted up. We have no idea. He could be the first Deku Tree ever, and, you know, we just don't know. So another big note that I noticed is the Hylian emblem. It's not the same one that you really see in Ocarina of Time. Zelda, I think, on her she has like gauntlets or something, you know, some sort of, you know, bracelet, wristlet thing or whatever. That has the typical Hylian emblem. But the thing is that there's a lot of other Hylian emblems scattered about on Link's glider thing. Has a different emblem on it. Has like looks like a rebel symbol in the middle of it. There's a scene where there's a guardian like patrolling, and there's like a kind of like a torn flag, and that looks like a different Hylian emblem. And then there's a scene in a temple where you see the statue of the goddess Hylia, and there's a whole thing, right? And that it's reminiscent of the emblem from Skyward Sword. Interesting enough. You know, as you guys remember that one, it's basically the same thing, just without the Triforce in the middle. So I think that's something definitely to note. Another big thing was the fact that there was the goddess statue Hylia. That was kind of interesting to me because obviously later on in the games, the goddess Hylia is never really even talked about. You know, she's a deity, but, you know, like the fierce deity, only mentioned in Majora's Mask. So she's kind of one of those, you know, god deities that we don't really hear about, but in Skyward Sword, and that's the only place we see that type of statue. There's nothing in it in the rest of the games. So I think that's important to note. And then the fact that the temple that it's in looks almost identical to the Temple of Time in Ocarina of Time. So I think that's another important thing to note, because that's, I mean, again, you know, it's kind of like the timeline, it's kind of hard to pinpoint where it might be because there's evidence of all different games coming in together. You know, we see Death Mountain, so that's pretty typical in every Zelda game, some sort of volcano area. Another thing to note, Zelda has a Sheikah book. One of the, you know, the Sheikah tablet or whatever it is. Zelda has one, so I'm thinking Zelda and Link are obviously, you know, maybe the people who revived Link are, you know, in cahoots with Zelda, you know, they're like friends or allies or something. Something that I noticed very, very, not frequently in the trailer, but it was definitely enough to make a note of it, is the blue flower that 5-petaled flower and there's like 6 pistils or whatever on it, you know, that comes up a couple times and it's very emphasized. You can see it, you can see it in front of the Deku tree, there's some, and then there's a clip where it literally just sits on one for a good maybe 5 seconds, and then even in the Breath of the Wild title, you can see at the very end, you know, one kind of blooms out. And it's that same flower, you know, it's a 5-petal and it looks the same. It might be a different flower, but it generally, I'm going to inference, it looks similar, so I'm going to say it is the same. It's hard to pinpoint, because, like, you know, obviously that flower seems like it has some sort of significance to it. It kind of looks like one of the flowers from the trading sequence in Wind Waker. Not identical, but somewhat similar. That's a little far-fetched to, you know, go and throw out and say, like, oh, it's the same flower, they're related, so, you know, before Wind Waker. But I think there's definitely something going on with that flower, otherwise it wouldn't be so prominent in the trailer. So, also, there's, at the very end, someone says, you have to save my daughter. I'm gonna guess that that's referring to Zelda. Maybe it's not. Nintendo likes to throw plot twists at us like that. You know, it might end up being some other random guy's daughter. But obviously, you know, it seems a little bit like maybe there is a King of Hyrule and Zelda is actually still a princess in this video, or in this game. And lastly, they say the Calamity Ganon. Personally, like, yeah, everybody knows who Ganon is, but we've never really heard the term Calamity Ganon, unless there's some sort of secret lore that I'm not familiar with. Personally, I just think it's Calamity, Ganon, meaning that Ganon is a calamity, not a special Calamity Ganon, that he is this, you know, different being. I think it's just a general thing. I think that they're more referring, if you, kind of spoiler alert, if you played Skyward Sword at the very end, Demise puts a curse on the land of Hyrule, saying that, you know, he'll always, you know, he'll be reincarnated in some form, and so maybe instead of being known as Demise, he became known as Ganon instead. Now, the thing is the first time Ganon really shows up is in Ocarina of Time, so maybe they're introducing a new Ganon, you know, a different Ganon that, you know, that's what he's been known to, that's what he's become known by, is this ever-presence of evil, maybe. There's really no telling. Also in that trailer, you know, we saw a lot of familiar faces. You know, we saw Goron, except he was like Ice Wizard kind of Goron. We saw what looked like a Great Fairy. We also saw, you know, we saw Korix, however you want, Korox, Bleach, however you want to pronounce it. Anyways, so we saw them. We saw the Ritu, the flying bird people. And we saw what looked like a Gerudo. You know, we saw the Gerudo emblem, so I'm gonna assume it's probably a Gerudo person. And we saw the Zora. So a lot of familiar species, except there's like some crossovers going on. You know, obviously we don't see Zora in Wind Waker, but we see Ritu. So, some crossbreeding happening. As for the Guardians, I honestly have no clue what they're there for. Really hard to say, honestly. I guess I'll get to that in the theories that I have. And as for like landscape, you know, we saw like a big castle that kind of, you know, might have been, you know, the regular Hyrule Castle, but otherwise, like, you know, it didn't really seem, it looked like the one from, like, Twilight Princess. That's what it looked like the most, to me at least. But otherwise, I mean, it could just be any other castle. Otherwise, there's really not a lot of places, like, yeah, you know, we saw an ocean and stuff, we saw a desert, but really there's nothing that really, like, anchors it into something familiar that we've seen before, you know, definitively. Besides the temple that we saw that looked really similar to Ocarina of Time, there's really nothing that, like, anchors it in to where it might be in the timeline. So that kind of brings me into where my theories are of where it is in the timeline. So I really have 3 general theories of where this game is placed. And the first and kind of the craziest theory of mine is that I think it happens in between Skyward Sword and Minish Cap. I know that's pretty crazy, but the main thinking of that comes from the statue of Hylia being in that temple, and then the Hylian emblems, because they're not the same as they are in Ocarina of Time. But then again, Zelda has it, so there's really like not like, again, there's nothing to really anchor it in, because yeah, it matches up with some things, but it doesn't match up with other things. Probably the craziest theory that I have, because it's, obviously, there's what about the Deku Tree? That's kind of unaccounted for. How did the Deku Tree see Link before? Maybe it's a whole new Link. So there's that. This could maybe the Deku Tree is rather a spirit than anything else. Maybe he's, I don't know. Maybe he's Hylia. I don't know. Who knows? So my next theory is not quite as crazy, and a lot of some people kind of agree with it, but it takes place after Ocarina of Time and in the arc with Wind Waker. Okay, so a lot of people think it takes place then, a lot of people don't. I've seen both sides arguments from both sides. Personally, I think it fits in well there. I could be wrong. Obviously, we all could be wrong. So, but my kind of argument for that is that, obviously there's the Deku Tree, there's the Korrix, and they're literally the exact same ones. If you look at their faces when they're lined up by the Deku Tree, like, they're the same Korrix that you see in Wind Waker. So my theory kind of with that and how it ties into Wind Waker is that, after Link died as a hero, what happened was, so Link became a soldier, and then I think when he died, there was no hero, and then Ganon was resurrected, and then there was some sort of big war. Maybe Ganon made the Guardians, maybe the gods made the Guardians. There's no really telling. And I think that there was a period of probably about 100 years from when Link died to when he came back to life in Breath of the Wild, and then all this stuff changed, and that's why potentially there's I don't know, maybe they reverted back to some old culture. That's where the Hylia statue comes in. Like, okay, well, where did that come from? And then there's the Hylian emblems. Like, yeah, we know that the Hylian emblem is used in Ocarina of Time, but we don't really see it around in Breath of the Wild. So again, not everything solidifies under one rooftop. And then I don't know, I think the Korrix is the biggest thing. So maybe after this game, there's the Great Flood. Maybe something happens, Link isn't successful, maybe, or maybe he even splits off into another timeline after this game. Right? Maybe Link is unsuccessful in one version, maybe he's successful in another one, and they start a whole new timeline. So I think maybe the Great Flood happens, and then that leads to maybe the Deku Tree that's in Breath of the Wild dies, and the Korrix plant a new one. Maybe the Korrix live forever for some reason. They plant a new Deku Tree that becomes the one in Wind Waker. As you know, the one in Wind Waker is inside of another tree trunk, and in Ocarina of Time, the Deku Sprout isn't inside of another tree trunk. So yeah, I don't really know how they planted it inside of a tree trunk, because that's a pretty big mass to hollow out. But besides that, again, there's nothing, it doesn't really solidify under that one theory. That is my theory, though. And then my last theory is that there is another split in the timeline after Ocarina of Time, maybe. Or maybe even before Ocarina of Time, there is another split. Maybe it's after Skyward Sword, there's an offshoot, where they keep worshipping the goddess Hylia, and then, the Master Sword is still a thing, obviously, and then it just kind of literally becomes its own whole story arc, Everything, we would assume that, obviously the Korrix would still become a thing, the Ritus would still become a thing, the Zoras would still become a thing. The Gorons are the only ones in Skyward Sword, so, I think that, maybe that's kind of where that comes from. Maybe it just splits off on its own. Honestly, that's probably the most solid theory that there is that it's just, it's its own game, and it's in its own little story world. I don't think Nintendo's biggest concern is how they're going to link it up into the story anyways. I think they're just more concentrated on making a game that people would want, not, oh, well, how does this fit in with our other games? Yeah, they want a little continuity, but I don't think they're really worried. I mean, look at the difference between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. Okay, well, how did they get that? And then they made the timeline after the game. I don't think that they really had that timeline in mind when they made Ocarina of Time, that, this story's gonna happen here, this story's gonna happen here, this story's gonna happen here. I mean, did they really know that they were gonna make Wind Waker Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass, and that they're gonna put them in their own timeline? Probably not. So, Nintendo, I don't think that their biggest concern is that. Their biggest concern is just making a story. A story that's good, a story that's entertaining, and a video game that we're going to want to play, and that we're going to want to keep playing, and that we're going to want to talk about, like I'm talking about right now. You know, Nintendo's getting exactly what they want. You know, they want us to talk about this. They want attention from it, which is a good thing. You know, we should give attention to a game that we enjoy. I think that's the biggest thing. I don't think we should all get so worked up over whether or not somebody has the same opinion about a video game, you know, timeline placement, because it's really not that big of a deal. The biggest deal is obviously enjoying the game, and we'll worry about where it's placed in the timeline later. Okay, so that was, in general, the gist of my thoughts on the new trailer and my theories on how this game is gonna work in with the other games. Obviously, the most important thing to all of this is the fact that we are going to enjoy this game. It doesn't matter where it's placed in the timeline in the end, because it's gonna be a good game, and we're all gonna have fun playing it. And I'm pretty sure Nintendo doesn't even care about where they're placing it. They're just trying to make a good game for us. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my theories. Some of you probably think it's a little convoluted, but, you know, we can't always agree with each other. Anyways, feel free to spark some discussions down in the comments below. I'd love to see that type of stuff. I'll probably chime in my own thoughts on it. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.